So today I want to dive into fear because I don't think there's a single person on this planet that hasn't, in some shape or form or another, experienced fear, whether it's emotional, psychological, physical. Fear is a big part of being human. I work with it all the time in my work that I do with individuals. And I think now more than ever, in a way, it's more prevalent because we're dealing with a very specific type of fear, which I'll get to a little bit later. But I think fear is this really interesting, it's a very interesting thing because a little bit as to what I spoke to in the intro to this podcast series, we haven't really been taught to be human. We go to school and we learn subjects about things that are in the world, out in the world, but we don't really learn that much about our inner world, which to me is as great a universe as the one that is around us. And so I think when we kind of touch upon our emotions, especially, but also our thoughts, we don't have any kind of a map or a guide or even a language because again, we haven't been taught, and it's not something that we openly discuss. So much as I spoke to in my last podcast is about the facade. And with Instagram culture, you can make the facade look really good. It can look really literally shiny and sparkly, but it's not really speaking to what it's like to be human. And fear is one of those things that, in my experience, both personally and in the work that I do, it is the catalyst. It is almost like the pathway or the path of initiation to get closer home towards ourselves, to actually get to the place that we're wanting to get to. Not that life is about a destination, because I really feel that it's primarily about the journey. There are these markers, these points in time throughout our life where it's really good to stop and reflect and to actually look back and go, okay, how far have I come so far? Again, not that it's about the destination, but sometimes we've got to stop and recognize how far we've come, because otherwise we're constantly pursuing something that is ahead of us, not recognizing how much we've grown along the way. But if we circumvent fear, if we resist it and push it away and deny it or try to get over it or try to transcend it, we're actually blocking ourselves from reaching that. When I say place, I mean more like that state of being, which is in, again, this is my opinion, but we're all trying to get to a place of a kind of peace. And when I say peace, I don't mean like an Om Zen peace, like I have no thoughts in my mind and I'm just uber positive and happy all the time. What I mean by peace is the ultimate acceptance of our entire experience. It doesn't matter if we're happy or sad or if we're ebbing or flowing. There's just this acceptance of like, wow, okay, this is my human experience. And I'm here with myself. Everything that I spoke to last time, like I'm not abandoning myself, I'm not rejecting myself. I'm here. And that peace brings about happiness, but that peace is just the state of it's okay to be me. It's all okay. Even if I don't feel okay, it's okay. You know what I mean? So, fear is this amazing catalyst if we're willing to stay with it. And the word that, really came very, very strongly into my mind and into my experience, God, it must have been, 8, 9, 10 years ago when I started doing workshops in London, was embracing our fear. Because often what our fear is, and now I'm going to speak more to emotional fear. Often our emotional fear is stemming from our childhood, from our wounds. And it doesn't matter how beautiful or good or seemingly quote unquote perfect, which I don't believe in that kind of perfection, but quote unquote perfect our childhood was, we all have a wound because, from, again, this is my belief, Our wound is what makes us human. So if you want to look at this from a spiritual perspective, you could say our wound is what brings us into this human experience and brings us into the body, because there's nothing like pain to bring us into the body and have us, if we choose, again, if we choose as a choice, to have us look at what's going on. It is pain and fear are probably the two loudest messengers. And I will just say that when I speak about emotions, I will often speak to them as they are just messengers. They're just something that is trying to communicate to us a deeper part of ourselves that is trying to get our attention. And the sad, unfortunate thing, again, because we haven't been taught how to be human, essentially. I know that sounds really weird, and I don't want to come across as arrogant saying that I have the answers. I know how what it is and how to be human, like I have the manual, because I don't. I'm still learning. So I'm just sharing what I've learned as humbly as I possibly can. So bear with me. But they're these parts of us that are trying to get our attention. And the sad thing is that, especially with fear and pain, what do? We run away from them. We suppress them, we oppress them, we numb them. We take the pill, we turn on the television, we look at Instagram, we try to run away from the discomfort of the vulnerability of pain and fear. When actually, if we can begin to look at them as they're just the little girl and boy in us, they're like, I feel alone, I feel scared, I'm hurting, I feel confused, and all I really need is a hug. So when I do inner child work, if I'm going to label it as anything, when I do inner child work with the people that I work with, 99.9999999% of the time, what that person needed when they were little was just a hug, because a hug, an embrace, encompasses everything. It encompasses presence, love, acceptance, the feeling that we're not alone. It gives us both physically and emotionally a sense of safety, warmth, nurture. I mean, there's just so much validation. So if we can learn what it feels like, not just the concept, but what it feels like to embrace our fear, our pain, essentially our humanity, not just when we're happy, but actually most importantly when we're struggling. That it changes everything. For me, it changed everything. I'm a very emotional, sensitive person, and when I was in my 20s, I felt like the tail was wagging the dog. I felt like the my emotions were running me. I felt like my sensitivity was something that, even though deep down I knew that there was nothing wrong with it, I felt like society was telling me that there was something wrong with it. And so I was in this conflict of like, well, but I don't believe there's something wrong with it, but I don't know what to do with this. And I had a very strong Buddhist meditation practice in my 20s. And where when I kind of hit the wall was this I don't want to say a denial of emotions, but it just never went there. It kind of stayed in the mind. It's a very masculine practice, which is not gender based. It's just a masculine practice, which is neither good or bad or better or worse. It's just that. It's just a very specific type of practice. And for me, I felt like it lacked a feminine perspective, which is the feminine is the emotions. You could say the masculine is more the mind, the feminine is more the body. And our emotions, even though we try to process them in our mind, they're happening in our body. So I felt like, something's missing, because I felt, okay, I'm such an emotional being. I don't believe that I'm meant to have all these emotions and then just kind of go, oh, okay, it's this, but then let it go, or find a way to move out or through or transcend them. I felt like, no, they're telling me something. This is a language in and of itself. And so I stepped away from my Buddhist practice, and I really went into diving more deeper into emotions. And the moment I did that, the moment that I started listening to them, the moment I started tending to them, caring for them, staying, I'm going to use that word a lot, just staying with them without abandoning myself in the process, I learned so much. And, long story short, I feel very much now that They are amazing tools. They are amazing guides, if we don't indulge in the story and the drama of them, but actually just take them as a very pure um, language, guide, messenger, whatever the word is that you feel resonates the most, but that they are a kind of language and system that if we choose to look at it through conscious eyes, if we can stay with awareness, they can bring us into a much deeper part of ourselves. And I would say what that's done for me is I've understood myself on a far, far deeper level. And so now, even if I feel uncomfortable, or I'm having a hard day, or I'm feeling insecure or worried or scared about something, I'm able to be with these feelings and emotions, and I'm able to understand what's going on deeper inside of me, within me, and how to show up and take care of myself, give myself what I need. And this is essentially, an aspect of inner child work, because it's like being the parent, or being the archetypal mother and father for this little being inside of us that's just scared. So coming back to fear, if we can see that fear, okay, how do I explain this? Where I was going to go is, if we can see that fear is not the enemy. Now, I would say in our culture, fear is definitely made the enemy. However, it's used so much. It's such a great tactic. Like, if you look at media, the news, everything is just literally pumping out fear. And it puts us into this kind of survival, constant, endless survival mode. And my God, this last year I think it's that on steroids. And fear ultimately isn't the enemy. Fear, as we know, can be used very much as a kind of psychological tactic when we're in an abusive relationship with a narcissist, a sociopath, whatever. Fear is like the control mechanism. You scare someone enough, and you have control over them. So similarly, in a weird way, when we are stuck in a state of fear within ourselves around emotions, we are that's what feels inhibiting about fears, because if we just stay stuck in the fear, it can literally paralyze us, right? I mean, similarly to how you go to an edge of a cliff and you feel that very, very important natural fear that says don't jump. You can literally be paralyzed with fear. I mean, I've never gone skydiving, but I imagine you're like in war with your brain that's like, what are you doing? You're not meant to jump out of a plane. So you have to override that system. But when it comes to our emotions, we can get into a really stagnant place if we're in the state of resistance. And I always say that when I'm working with someone, the point just before you go into the fear is the most terrifying place, because it's the unknown. And so we have this anticipation, this suspense, this buildup of what the fear is, and it's so much bigger in our mind. It's so much scarier. It's so much more. It's just scary, right? It's just that. It's just scary. And then the moment that we can stay with it and breathe into it, there's automatically even just the slightest level of relief, because it's that part of us that finally feels seen. We're not fighting against ourselves. We're not resisting. We're not pushing away. We're not, the image that I often give is, if you imagine that it's the little girl or little boy inside of us that's scared and lonely. Fear, the way that we react to fear is like literally slamming the door on them, and then they're in this room by themselves and they're pounding on the door, right? That's the fear. They're pounding on the door. They're crying, they're screaming, they're saying, hey, I don't want to be alone anymore. This is too painful. I'm just a kid. All I need is the presence of someone else that can hold me, so I don't have to be scared by myself. And we just keep on going, nope, not going to open the door, not going to open the door, not going to open the door. And what we resist persists, right? So it gets louder, it gets worse. If we can stay long enough with our fear and recognize it's not the enemy, it's just this vulnerable, tender very human part of us that needs our attention. When we can open the door and walk towards the little child and kneel down and hold them in our lap, hold them in our arms, and let them know that we're safe. Like our body just is like relief, just relief. Like, thank you for finally seeing me, hearing me. Then, then there can be a whole conversation that can open up. But that's the beginning. So the invitation, as uncomfortable as it may be, is that when fear or pain, sadness arises, can you stay long enough? Like, often what I'll say is just pause, close your eyes, take one deep breath in and out. Just that, like even just that. And there might be the part that's like, this is scaring the crap out of me. I can't. It's even with that, it's like, okay, that can that be okay? Breathe into that. And if this is kind of the first goes of doing this kind of work, I do think it's really helpful to have a guide. I had my guides. That's what I do for people. And then eventually it's really learning how to do that on your own. And I think it's incredibly liberating, because then all of a sudden you get to this, not all of a sudden, but you eventually get to this point where, okay, it doesn't matter what arises, it's going to be okay, because I know how to be with it. Not, I don't want to say I know how to handle it or I know how to fix it, because this, again, I can't tell you how many people call me for a consultation and go, what's wrong with me? How do I fix it? How do I get rid of it? It's like, no, there's nothing to get rid of. There's nothing to fix. It's just a part of you that needs your loving attention. That's it. That's what we need to learn to do. So, my invitation to you is to begin to just set the intention of maybe reframing fear. That maybe fear isn't the enemy, but fear is a messenger. And if we're constantly in a state of fear, or if we're terrifying ourselves or somebody else or a governing body or the media, or if fear is being infiltrated, and it feels sometimes very invasive, we've got to ask ourselves, well, why? What is the point of that? Because there's no need to stay in a state of fear. There's no need to spoon feed or force feed fear into ourselves, others. It's just not, and fear in that way isn't beneficial for anything. It actually doesn't, it motivates us in a wrong way, in a very disempowering way. But fear that we can look at and we can be with, and we can almost in a way humanize and transform it, alchemize it by being with it, by loving it. So that's the antidote to fear, is love. If we can love these parts of ourselves, if we can love these parts in the people that we love and care about, and then even beyond to the people that we don't know and the world at large, that is the biggest and best and greatest way to alchemize anything. Love is the true alchemist, because love can transmute anything and everything. So fear requires love. It cannot be circumvented. It cannot even be transcended. Because also, if we transcend it, we miss the gift that comes through fear, through pain, through suffering. And these things are just a very human, natural part of being a human being. So there's something to learn, as long as we don't get stuck in them, as long as we don't get stuck in the story and make a big story and drama out of them, but actually take the sensation, the feeling, the emotion, the memory, the trigger, the wound, and recognize what it is and where it's coming from, and then reach that place of love within ourselves. It changes everything. And I can say that from just firsthand experience of having walked through the fire. And, I will continue, as we all will. We will have moment after moment, experience after experience in life, where we will have to walk through the fire of fear and pain and suffering. And that's part of life. Like, I think that the quicker we can accept that that's a part of existence, the more peace we can find within ourselves. Because again, we've lived in a culture that's like, be happy all the time, be positive all the time, succeed, be productive. What did you do today? You're only as worth as much as what you do and how well you succeed in it. No, 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 no. You're enough as you are. And your human experience is okay. There's nothing wrong with it. It's beautiful. But we've got to learn the language of it, not just the language of a somewhat superficial happiness that in the end is not real happiness, because happiness, in my opinion, is peace. Peace comes when we accept all parts of our human experience. So there's a little bit, I would say, an introduction on fear. I can get much more specific. If you're listening to this, if it's interesting to you, please send me like your questions, your thoughts, anything else that you would like me to dive deeper into or just have the conversation. This can be a kind of ongoing dialogue, even though it's coming out as a monologue. I would love to get your feedback and what you're curious about, and I'm happy to speak about it. So, but for today, that's just an invitation to set the intention. How can you embrace fear? How can you bring love to fear and ultimately alchemize your state of being? So, anyway, wishing you all a beautiful day. Thank you for listening.